So when I was about 5 or 6, I used to go visit my great uncle on 187th Street in the Bronx, and he lived in this apartment. It was like a 5-story walk up that had been built during the late 1890s, and it was part of a series of buildings that stretched out down towards the church and the Bronx Zoo on the other side. And these buildings were just ancient. They had been there since, it was like something from The Godfather, Part 2, where, you see people wandering around in 1910, the horses and carts on the street. Essentially, it was that. It was just that with, the 1980s. And when we would go inside, there was this great tile work at the base of the entrance. It was actually quite ornate, considering it was a working class area. Just goes to show you how, back in the day, working class had a little bit more control over things. But essentially, you would walk in, and there were these stairs. It was a walk-up. And they were made of marble, which I also thought was fairly ornate for the day. But then you remember that, architects were using marble back then because it was just bulletproof and it never wore out. But this stuff did. And after 100 years of people stomping up the stairs after a long day of work, or after getting canned, or after getting a promotion, or after finding out that they're having kids, or after finding out that maybe an opportunity was lost to them, that they went trudging up these stairs, and after 100 years, this marble had 2 valleys in it from footfalls. And I thought that was fascinating. It was beyond me. I couldn't comprehend who had done this, who had passed through here, what great minds or sad souls or interesting stories had traversed this staircase and worn these 2 valleys into marble. Is pretty impressive. It's like that saying, water weareth away the stone that the hammer shalt not break. This is the type of material that you could try to destroy and fail, but at the same time, if you just have enough pressure over enough time, it starts to wear itself in. And while some people would see it as something worthy to replace, I always thought it was great because when I put my feet down, I was walking in the well-worn steps of those who were wiser than me. It was quite a profound moment at that age to think about. I imagine that's what people think when they go stand on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, or they're driving down Route 66. You're in a place where like-minded people, irregardless of time, were having a shared experience with you, standing in that one place. It's pretty cool. And I guess that's why the first thing I look at on a guitar is always the fretboard. It's such a huge tell on who had these things. Where has this thing been? How far has it traveled? Has it been all over the planet? It looks like it, judging by the case. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it stayed in the basement. Maybe it spent its whole life in one room, just being played by one person. While the television, flickered the news about a moon landing. Or, about Robert Kennedy being shot. Or about the end of a war. The fall of Saigon in 1975, or the return of the troops. Who's had this thing in their hands? What were they thinking about? And what did they write? You just never know where these things have been, and that's the best part. It makes you just all the more wanting to take them out and get more experiences in them. And then pass them off to somebody else and let them keep doing it. I was 5 or 6 when I was looking at those marble stairs, and I'd love to be able to go look at them again. I just never get over there. I'm on the other side of the country. And who has the time, really, to just jump in a plane and go somewhere just to stare at something that affected you so profoundly when you were a kid? It's just not a luxury that everybody has. So I guess that this is a different way to kind of recapture that, to consider the idea of communal humanity. Experiencing what somebody else experienced at a different time, in a different place, but sharing that experience with somebody that you might never know or even know about. But here you are playing this guitar that they bought brand new just 2 years after John Kennedy was shot. And now here you are in, 2022, and you're still playing this thing and it still works. All right, so we have done all of our wet sanding, and we have got a really good gloss going. You can kind of see in the reflection there. which is not too bad. It's a little lighter on camera. It's actually a little bit more brown in real life. But we got a really good finish on the heel, and something that I really appreciate on this one is that some of the binding was lifting slightly, so there are some highlight spots on this. And luckily enough, the nitro tint had actually managed to really land the plane on this. And I have not wet sanded and or buffed the headstock. And the reason that I haven't done this is that quite a few people had actually talked about blonde. I know I'd mentioned it in the video because I'd actually come across a couple, and I noticed that Fender was putting out a lot of these that came with the bound necks were blonde in finish. And I think the reason is that this was like a flagship model. The Jazzmaster and the Jag were always the big stuff. The Jazzmaster especially was supposed to be a flagship model that just never at the moment really took off in sales. And I think at 65 that this particular guitar was sold as a real bells and whistles, all options checked. And hence we had the F back tuners, and we've got the binding, and it was Olympic white, but heck, why not? Let's just go ahead and push it right into blonde. I'm actually going to mix a bit of blonde with some Mary Kay translucent white and try to get it a little closer to the Olympic white so it's not like a butterscotch telly, but use the two of them mixed together at certain levels to emulate some tobacco staining, because obviously this neck has got that. You see on the binding that it does look like it's been in a smoker's place. So we're going to do a little bit of that, and we're going to do it starting off with a Mary Kay translucent on the headstock as well, and then shoot maybe 1 or 2 passes of a light neck amber over it, so that as it wears in, it will start to pick up those touch surface wear points and on the body and on the neck. So that's where we're at right now. Okay, you guys, so we've got the back all lined up. We've got a really good shine on it. It's not perfect, but it's close enough for right now. I'm going to give it another wet sanding in a few weeks after the lacquer shrinks a little bit more, because remember, it's always curing. And you can see where I've left the grain open, and I've left it open right here, and I've left it open right here, and the reason is because in the factory case for these, the edge of the case would have been resting against the side of the headstock, and any fore and aft vibrations during transit would have eventually worn those spots of the lacquer away. We've also got a slight wear pattern here. This isn't really relicking, this is kind of just, I'm finishing the neck, and yeah, the finish is really thin. I like finishing them really thin. That's how they came from the factory, so that's how I prefer that they play. I feel that they resonate more strongly and that they're a little bit more interesting. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to start sanding this headstock, and we're going to get it to a flat surface. We're not trying to get it shiny, we're actually trying to get it dull. And we're going to hit it up to about 800, and then after that we are going to be prepped and ready for this. This will never be a museum piece anymore, but it can be a fantastic player's grade vintage guitar, and if we can get it as close as we can to being as true as it would have been if it were unaltered in the past, then that is our objective. It's the only other objective other than to keep it exactly as it was when we got it. One of those two options is preservation. I'll leave it to you to decide. Well, folks, it's windy and it's cold. So let's do something stupid and finish this neck in the middle of the frozen tundra. Just joke around. I know some of you guys are in properly cold places, but you got to admit, for Southern Californians, we're pretty spoiled, and when it drops below 60 or 50, we are not prepared or acclimated for that, especially in a work sense. And when it drops down to right now, which is about 43 or 44 degrees outside, yeah, you know, we just aren't prepared for that sort of things. Here's what we are going to do. I actually had to tape down the neck to the stool because I didn't want the neck to blow away. It's that windy out. It's really gusty. Okay, so now that we've got a good prepped surface, a nice clean surface with which for the laminate to adhere to, we're going to go ahead and cut this thing out, and we're going to drop it on there. When you're cutting it out there, kind of try to fit it like a pattern like that. And the reason is that it leaves you enough where you've got some space around the letters where if you sand a little too hard that you won't cut it into the laminate, but at the same time it gives it kind of a flowing look to it. So when you lacquer over, if the lacquer shrinks at all, the lines on the outside of the template won't be protrusive or distracting. Go ahead and drop them in the water. After about 60 seconds, the laminate's going to separate. Take it out and drop it into position. The good thing about this is it's not a sticker. It's a water slide decal. So essentially you can reposition it several times without worrying about hurting it, as long as you're careful. Take a bit of tissue paper, roll it around like you just saw me do it. It makes kind of a blotter out of this. And you anchor down the left side or the right side of the laminate, and then you sweep in the opposite direction with the tissue. This will help you kind of quote-unquote squeegee out any air pockets that may be caught between the film and kind of soak up some of the excess water so that the laminate will dry into place much more quickly. Sweeping it back and forth like that and always working from the center towards the outside edge will get rid of any air pockets or any air bubbles that might be hiding between the laminate and the surface, creating a rise that would damage the laminate when you sand it. But other than that, once it's in position, if it looks straight and it's flat and the edges are all nice and laid out and it's not folded up or it doesn't have any wrinkles, then you're looking pretty good. Luckily enough, laminate paper has come a long way in the last 20 years. I can remember when putting a laminate down was quite nerve-wracking because the film had a tendency of folding over itself. Okay, now at this stage, essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to lock the laminate under the lacquer, because we could have very easily just polished that Mary Kay white, but we had to have the laminate over it. The laminate had to be over the Mary Kay so that the Mary Kay didn't inadvertently tint the laminate white. So in this stage, essentially what you're doing is you're burying the laminate in more clear coat. But you got to be careful with this one. You've got to kind of dust it the first couple of times to seal the laminate paper so that it isn't too heavily affected by the reaction of the lacquer. And then after you've got a good base on it, then you want to give it a couple of really heavy turns at the end so you can put some material between you and that laminate. So when you do wet sand it and you do get that nice sheen and polishable surface, that you're not damaging the laminate by doing so. Okay, so we've got our water slide decal on the headstock, and we have the face of the headstock all clear coated, locking the water slide into place. The only problem is now is that we're going to have a high spot. Right over the decal, the paper is going to make that finish stick, and we're going to get a little low spot in between, these little dips on the sides. So in order to sand this out and get it completely flat, we have to knock the top off of the finish, focus our sanding on the high spots, while flat sanding in a circular overlapping motion with some 800 grit with some water on it, and it'll knock those little dips out of the sides. So this way you get a good glassy surface that you can buff back and have it be quite presentable. So we're going to go ahead and start off with our 800 grit, and we're going to focus over there. Now, one thing that any expert or individual who is going to assess this guitar later on in life is going to pick up on is that it's definitely a refinish. And the reason that we know it's a refinish is because the laminate is under the lacquer. See that edge right there? You got to keep sanding. The laminate is going to be under the lacquer. And if this were an original finish 1965 Jaguar, the laminate would actually be above the lacquer. And if you've ever owned a vintage Fender, then you know the anxiety of cleaning up the headstock or trying to polish the finish while staying away from the laminate because they're so easy to damage, them being in an unsealed state. So anybody looking at this in the future is going to know right off the bat that this has been refinished. This is another reason why I like doing it this way, because you're restoring the aesthetic, you're bringing the charm and the finesse back to the guitar, but at the same time, you're making it almost impossible for somebody to try to pass this off as something that it isn't in the near future. You're not creating an environment where essentially somebody could try to sell this as an original finish that has been made to look old. You're giving a subtle wink and a cue to any assessor, any individual who is estimating this later on in life, that though it is very nice, it is not an all-original guitar. Well, you guys, that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for this part 2 of our 65 Jaguar restoration. And if you wanted to see how this neck actually started out, you can go ahead and click on part 1 just beneath. And that kind of shows the state that it was in when we got it, where it was covered with that blue paint front and back. And the original finish, unfortunately, was completely removed, and we had to take it down to bare wood. You can go ahead and click on that one if you want to see how it started off, where we kind of give a loose prognosis on what we're looking at and where we're kind of going with this. However, that is going to do it for this episode. You may have noticed that I left the last tuner out, and the reason that I did is that I need to get some measurements off of the recess and off of the new tuners that I've got, because it looks like we are going to have to use those. I cannot find reproductions that are reasonably priced, except for some real cheap knockoff ones that look like they might be just as bad as the originals. So I'm going to go ahead and hold on to those new ones, and we're going to see if we can't get those to start working. In the meantime, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys got a little bit of something out of, you know, the headstock water slide decal placement, or maybe a you know, tip to 10, and gave you a couple tips on how to sand something that you're working on at the house. Whatever, it's just cool to just kind of have some project stuff to work on. Anyway, thank you guys for watching the videos. Really appreciate it. And for those of you guys, we've definitely got a jump in subscribership lately, which is awesome, and I really appreciate you guys subscribing. So if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It's a red word. It's over there somewhere. I don't know where it is. But go ahead and click on it. It's free, and you know, hopefully you guys enjoy the videos. And for those of you who have already subscribed, thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful afternoon. Go play your guitar. Go do something loud. I actually am going to go unbox that thing right over there, which is going to be our next review, and hopefully you guys will dig that. I think you'll like it. It's kind of weird. It's a little outside the Gibson and Fender usual. And in the meantime, we are going to go ahead and start shooting the next video for this, where we are going to put this thing back to its former glory. Have a beautiful afternoon. Thanks again for tuning in to the episode, and we'll see you guys next time.